Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Meredith, you are the same Shane Meridith that testified previously in this case?
Yes.
All right. To the witness. Let me remind you that you're still under oath.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Mr. Meredith, you've already told us that you were employed at Neverland Valley Ranch, correct?
That's correct.
And your role was as a security guard, correct?
Yes.
And during the month of February, you were employed there, correct?
Yes.
And between the 17th and the 20th of February, you were working that week, is that correct, on those days?
Yeah, I would have been if I was there, yeah.
And the shift that you were working would be what?
Predominantly it would be a 12-hour shift, and it would be anywhere from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., or 6 a.m. to 6 p.m.
You were working in the daytime on many of those days, correct?
Yeah, correct.
During the time between the 17th of February and the 20th of February when you were at work at the ranch, did you ever see any boys driving any cars on the property?
No, I did not.
During the time that you were on the ranch during that period of time, did you ever read any notes in any of the logs that were kept that indicated any boys were driving cars on the property without adult supervision?
No, I did not.
Based upon your training and experience in working at Neverland Valley Ranch, if somebody had seen an underage child driving one of the cars during that period of time, would that be the kind of thing that would be noted in the logs of the ranch?
I would imagine so.
No further questions.
Mr. Mesereau?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Meredith, Neverland is approximately 2,800 acres, correct?
That's correct.
And when you worked security, how many other security personnel were there?
That could be anywhere from 2 to 4 other individuals, besides myself.
Did you all hang out together during your shift, or did you go separate directions?
Yes, sir, we would have our own specific jobs.
And what specific jobs are you talking about?
Well, one officer would be at the gate, which would be the gate security, and that would be depending on how many officers were available, we would split that shift up. And the other officers, you would have either 1 or 2 officers that were doing the house checks, and then you would also have an officer doing a mobile check in a vehicle.
Now, you're not sure which checks you did during the time period the prosecutor just identified?
Right, yeah, I could have been doing anything during that time.
What could you have been doing?
Doing a perimeter check, doing a house check, doing a mobile check, or working the front gate.
Now, please describe what you mean by a perimeter check.
You would drive. What you would do is, we would leave our security shack area. We would drive through the front of the property, leaving actually through the front gate, going off property for about, probably a mile or so in either direction of the ranch, just to check to make sure that the fence line was secure.
If you were doing a perimeter check, someone could have driven a vehicle on the property and you wouldn't see it, true?
Object. Calls for speculation.
Overruled. You may answer.
Sure.
If you were doing a perimeter check, how far away from the main house would you be?
Well, like I said, you'd actually, at some point during that mobile perimeter check, you would actually leave the property. So I'd say the furthest point you would probably be 6, 7 miles maybe.
So you could be 6 or 7 miles away from where the vehicles are located, right?
Correct. During that check.
And there would possibly be hills even blocking your view of the main house, correct?
That's correct.
And if someone were driving a vehicle around the house, you would have no way of even seeing it if you were looking that direction, right?
That's correct.
Object is argumentative.
Sustained.
Now, besides a perimeter check, what else could you have been doing during your security work during that time period?
You'd also do a house check, which was where you'd be, physically checking the house area, walking around the house, going through the arcade, areas like that.
And what other types of checks would you have been doing?
Other than the mobile or the house check, you would be at the front gate, or any check that was deemed necessary by a supervisor. Somebody would have you check something.
Now, the prosecutor asked you whether or not, if someone was caught driving a vehicle for a short distance, for example, it would automatically go into the log. Doesn't actually get logged in, does it?
Not No. It wouldn't be unusual for it not to be logged.
In fact, every time a guest is found violating any type of rule at Neverland and stopped and told not to do it, it isn't automatically logged in, is it?
That's correct. It's left up to the supervisor whether it gets.
Would it be accurate to say that percentage-wise, when guests or their children are caught violating some rule at Neverland, most of those never get logged in any place, correct?
I'm going to object to the question. It calls for speculation.
It's cross-examination.
And doesn't deal with the subject matter.
Just a moment. Overruled. It calls for custom and habit. Go ahead.
I now don't remember if you actually.
I'll have it read back.
I'm sorry.
Would it be accurate to say that percentage-wise, when guests or their children are caught violating some rule at Neverland, most of those never get logged in any place, correct?
I couldn't speculate on whether, on a percentage-wise. Personally, if something were to come to my attention, it would be logged in. But that's just my personal, I wouldn't know. As far as somebody else dealing with something that happens like that, I wouldn't have any knowledge of that.
Wouldn't you agree that other security personnel often did not log things in that they thought were violative of a rule?
That's a fair assumption. I wouldn't, again, if it's something that I would, that I thought was pertinent, I would log it in. Or I would have whoever I was supervising log it in. But, it's possible, sure.
Now, were you given a course on when to log something in?
No, sir.
Was anybody given a course about when they should put something into the logs if they see a rule being violated?
Not that I'm aware of.
Is the decision to log something in pretty much up to the individual who sees the violation?
That's correct. Or the supervisor. Like I said, more times than not it would be the supervisor's discretion whether it should be logged in.
If you're going to log something in, what do you have to do?
As far as?
Where do you go to log it in?
The front gate. You would call the front gate and they would log it in the logbook there, and then you'd also do a log at our shack area.
Alright, now, if you're doing a perimeter search, and you find someone, say you found a visitor wandering around the property where you didn't want them to be. Okay. And you said, why don't you go back to the main house? You shouldn't be here. This is 2,800 acres of property, and you don't want to get lost, or whatever. You would have to drive a distance, possibly, to log that in, correct?
Yeah, you'd have to drive back to the main house area to log that in, or just call it in to the front gate.
And while you were working at Neverland, do you recall any situations where somebody brought to your attention that some child had violated a rule and you never, ever saw that logged in?
Yeah, that's fair to say.
No further questions.
Mr. Meridith, I'm not talking about violating any rule at the ranch. I'm talking about an underage child driving a vehicle on the ranch, okay?
Yes, sir.
And in your experience, would that be something that would be logged in or officials to be notified?
Absolutely.
The ranch is very safety conscious, is it not?
Yes, it is.
And they try to minimize the amount of liability or risk that can occur from the many guests that occur at the ranch. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
And the fact that an underage child would be allowed into a vehicle and to drive it without supervision would be something that would be a very serious violation of the ranch protocol, would it not?
I would think so, yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
No further questions.
All right, you may step down. Thank you.
Call Jesus Salas to the stand.
You're recalling him. He's already testified.
Yes, he has, Your Honor.
You may be seated. You're still under oath.
Good afternoon, Mr. Salas.
Good afternoon.
You have previously testified in this case that you were the house manager during the period of 2003 at Neverland Ranch, correct?
That is correct.
And during the period of February to March 2003, how often were you at Neverland Ranch?
I would say I was there for a couple of weeks.
Okay. Were you working in the month of February?
Yes, I was.
How many days a week were you working in February?
Well, I was working pretty much every day.
Every day?
Uh-huh.
Even weekends?
Even weekends.
And what about in the beginning of March? Were you working in March?
Yes, I was.
How many days a week were you working in March?
It was about the same.
Okay, so you were working without days off during that period of time?
Well, I had some days off, but, pretty much I was busy most of the time, yes.
Would you ever spend the night at Neverland?
Yes, I did.
How often during that period of February to March 2003?
I would say I spent more time during the month of March.
Okay, as far as spending the night there?
Yes.
In the first couple of weeks of March, have you had a chance to review the logs concerning your attendance at Neverland Ranch?
Yes, I have.
And how often were you spending the night during the first couple of weeks in March?
It was about a week and a half, couple weeks that I was staying there over the night.
During the first couple of weeks?
That's correct, yes.
Alright, during the period of time that you worked at Neverland Ranch, and I believe you said you've worked there for quite a few years, is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Going back to what year?
I'm sorry?
Going back to what year? When did you start working at Neverland Ranch?
I started working there in '83.
Okay, so before Mr. Jackson purchased the ranch you were working there?
That is correct, yes.
Did you ever witness children, underage children, driving motor vehicles at Neverland Ranch?
No, I never.
Did you ever hear that underage children were driving motor vehicles at Neverland Ranch?
No, never heard anything about. Nobody ever reported anything to me.
Did you ever report to anybody that underage children were driving vehicles at Neverland Ranch?
No.
You never told Joe Marcus anything like that?
I never told Joe Marcus.
While you were house manager, let me just refresh my memory. When did you start your duties as house manager for Mr. Jackson?
When?
When did you become house manager?
Oh, that was 2002, I believe.
Alright, during the period of time that you were house manager at Neverland, did you have an office in the main residence?
Yes, I did.
Did you have a desk in that office?
Yes.
Did you ever keep money, cash money, in that desk?
No, never kept any money there.
Did you ever have, so was there ever a time when you were missing money, where money was taken from your desk or from your office area at Neverland Ranch?
Never lost any money, no.
During the time that the Arvizos were guests at Neverland Ranch, did you ever keep anything that, maybe a paperweight of some sort, something that looked like a crystal made of plastic or glass? Did you ever have anything like that in your office or your desk?
Not that I can remember, no.
Did you ever have anything like that that you found to be missing?
No.
In your office or desk during the period of time that the Arvizos stayed there?
No, not at all.
During the time that you were house manager and the Arvizos were staying at Neverland Ranch, did you ever receive a report of any kind from a chef working in the kitchen that money had been removed from a drawer or from the kitchen area that belonged to one of the chefs?
No, never was reported to me.
Did Angel Vivanco specifically ever tell you that money was taken from the kitchen area by one of the guests?
No, never told me anything.
During the time that you were house manager at Neverland and the Arvizos were staying there or at any time, did Angel Vivanco ever tell you of an incident where Star Arvizo was playing around with a knife involving Mr. Vivanco?
No, never was reported to me.
You have previously testified that one night you helped the Arvizos to leave Neverland Ranch, that you drove them to their home. Do you remember testifying about that?
That is correct, yes.
The night that you drove the Arvizo family from Neverland Ranch, did you ever notify Joe Marcus that you were leaving Neverland with the Arvizo family?
No, I didn't never talk to Joe Marcus that night.
Did you ever notify anybody to tell Joe Marcus that you were leaving Neverland with the Arvizo family?
No, I didn't.
Never had a conversation with him that evening?
No.
During the period of February and March of 2003, you remember that the Arvizo family spent quite a bit of time at Neverland, true?
That is correct, yes.
Can you characterize in a percentage basis the number of nights during that period that the Arvizo children spent the night in Mr. Jackson's bedroom?
Objection. Foundation.
Sustained.
Were you aware whether or not the Arvizo children ever spent the night in Mr. Jackson's bedroom?
Objection. Foundation.
Sustained.
Did you ever personally witness the fact that the Arvizo family would spend the night in Michael Jackson's bedroom?
Same objection.
Overruled.
You may answer.
Yes.
As house manager, would you often, how late would you stay before you went home at night?
Varies. Sometimes it was 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning.
And when you would leave the property, would you generally be aware of the location of individual guests who were in the main residence?
I would say yes.
Okay. Was that part of your job, to be somewhat aware of what the guests were doing inside the main house? Not what they were doing, but I should say their various locations.
Well, it was necessary for me to know where they were so I can notify the security for safety reasons.
Okay.
Yes.
And based upon your personal experience, let me back up. So during that period of time when, let's say in the evening hours and in the early morning hours when you were staying late at Neverland Ranch, would you generally stay around the main residence?
Yes.
Okay. Would you be inside the main residence?
I was inside there.
And that's where your office was, correct?
That is correct, yes.
So were you personally aware, during this period of time, February to March, when the Arvizos were visiting Neverland Ranch, were you generally aware of their location, the location that the Arvizo boys slept in?
Objection. Foundation.
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes, I was aware.
And can you characterize, based upon your own personal observations, on a percentage basis the number of nights you would estimate that the Arvizo boys spent in Michael Jackson's bedroom during that period of time that they were visiting in March and February of 2003?
Objection. Foundation.
Overruled. You may answer.
I would say they spent 90% of the time.
Mr. Salas, during that same period of time, focusing again in 2003, I believe you said that you left your employment at Neverland sometime during the summer of that year. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
During that period of time of 2003, before you left your employment, did you ever see Michael Jackson when he was in an intoxicated state?
Objection. Beyond the scope. Improper rebuttal.
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes, I did.
How often would you see Mr. Jackson in a condition that you would characterize as intoxicated during that period of time?
Objection. Foundation. Relevance.
Overruled. You may answer.
It was quite a few times.
Did you ever see him intoxicated in the presence of his own children?
Yes, I did, yes.
Objection. Relevance.
Overruled.
Yes.
I didn't hear.
I said, yes, I did.
How often did you see him intoxicated in the presence of his own children?
Objection. Relevance.
Overruled. You may answer.
My belief, it was, say, about 3 times.
Did you ever see him intoxicated, in such an intoxicated condition that you had a concern as to whether or not he could properly and responsibly care for his children?
Objection. Relevance. Beyond the scope. Leading.
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes, I did.
And what was your opinion about that?
Objection. Irrelevant opinion.
Overruled.
You may answer.
To me, it wasn't safe for the kids to be around him.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Salas.
Mr. Salas, you say you've seen Mr. Jackson intoxicated maybe 3 times during that period?
That is correct, in the way that I thought it wasn't safe for him and his family.
Was a nanny around?
Yes, it was.
In fact, there was a nanny around taking care of his children, correct?
That is correct, except when he used to take them to his room, yes.
Okay, and have you ever been intoxicated in your house?
Oh, yes.
Were your children there?
Yes.
Objection. Irrelevant.
The answer is in. Next question.
Now, you say you saw the Arvizo children in Michael Jackson's room, right?
That is correct.
Were you in the room with them?
I was not in the room with them.
Pretty big room area, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
It's 2 levels?
That is correct, yes.
And people sometimes sleep on the lower level, right?
True.
Sometimes people sleep on the higher level, right?
That is correct, yes.
In fact, Mr. Jackson has had a lot of people in and out, correct?
Yes.
You don't know where anyone was sleeping when the Arvizo children were in that area, right?
Actually, I knew where they were staying.
Well, they were staying in that large area, correct?
Right.
You testified earlier at one point you saw them on the lower level, right?
That's correct, yes.
The lower level below Michael Jackson's bed, true?
True.
His bed's upstairs, and you saw them sleeping downstairs, right, one time?
That is right, yes.
Now, was it part of your job to normally go into his room?
Only when he asked me or he needed something.
And if he asked you to bring him something, you would open the door and go in, right?
Yes.
Okay, and there are other people he would ask to come in his room and bring him things, right?
That is true, yes.
Now, the prosecutor asked you about whether or not Angel Vivanco ever reported a knife incident to you, correct?
Correct.
Were you aware that he never said he reported it to you? He said he reported it to Rudy Lozano?
I wasn't aware of that. Never was reported to me.
Who is Rudy Lozano?
He is the chef.
Okay, he was Mr. Vivanco's direct supervisor, true?
Yes. In the kitchen area, yes. But I was responsible for all of them.
Okay, now, did you know that Star Arvizo pulled a knife on Kiki Fournier one time?
Objection. Irrelevant. No foundation.
Overruled. You may answer.
Did you know that?
I was not aware of that.
So she didn't report that to you?
No.
Not everybody always reported to you problems that the Arvizo children caused at Neverland, right?
Objection. Argumentative.
Overruled. You may answer.
Well, I'm just finding that out.
Yeah. Did anyone ever report to you that Star was found with an adult magazine that he said he brought from his own home?
Objection. Argumentative.
Overruled.
Was that ever reported to you?
Never was reported to me, no.
Did anyone ever report to you that Star and Gavin Arvizo were caught masturbating in the guest unit?
Objection. Argumentative.
Overruled.
Was that reported to you?
No, it wasn't.
Was it ever reported to you that Star Arvizo went into the control room of the amusement park and wrote the words, "Suck dick," on the wall? Anyone report that to you?
No, never was reported to me.
Was it reported to you that one of the security guards caught Star and Gavin Arvizo in the wine cellar alone with a half-filled bottle of wine?
No, that was never reported to me either.
Was it reported to you that Gavin Arvizo told Angel Vivanco, "You put alcohol in my milkshake or I'll get you fired"?
No, it wasn't.
Objection. Misstates the evidence.
Sustained.
And argumentative.
Misstates the evidence. Sustained.
Excuse me. I'll rephrase it. My mistake. Was it ever reported to you Star Arvizo told Angel Vivanco, "You put some alcoholic beverages in my milkshake or I'll get you fired"?
No, it was never reported to me.
Was it ever reported to you that Star and Gavin used to spit on employees when they rode the amusement park rides?
Objection. Argumentative.
Overruled.
No, never was reported to me either.
Was it ever reported to you that Star and Gavin Arvizo would take their shoes and throw them at people from the amusement park rides?
Never heard that either.
Was it ever reported to you that Star and Gavin Arvizo made an absolute mess out of their bedrooms in the guest quarters?
Not that I can remember, no.
Was it ever reported to you that Star and Gavin Arvizo used to search the television for adult films?
Objection.
At their guest unit?
Assumes facts not in evidence.
Sustained.
Not everybody reports every violation of a guest to you, do they?
Well, I guess not.
Now, you said you learned a lot of things weren't reported to you, right?
Yes.
Okay, and where have you learned that from?
Well, being part of responsibility.
Now, there are drawers in the kitchen, correct?
There are what? I'm sorry.
Drawers in the kitchen, right?
Yes.
And certainly someone in the kitchen could put money, if they wanted, in one of the drawers temporarily, couldn't they?
I believe so, yes.
And not everybody would report that to you, would they?
I guess not necessarily, no.
And if one of the Arvizo children stole money from a drawer in the kitchen, you wouldn't necessarily find out about it, would you?
Not if they don't tell me.
And if Angel Vivanco thought his job was in jeopardy if he reported it, you might not hear, right?
Objection. Argumentative.
Sustained.
Assumes facts not in evidence.
Now, have you looked at any records to determine whether or not you called Joe Marcus the night you drove Janet Arvizo from the ranch?
No, I never, no.
Would it refresh your recollection if I showed you a phone record showing a phone call on the night of February 12th, time, 12:55 a.m., to Joe Marcus from a ranch number?
No, I can tell you, because Joe wasn't even at the ranch that day.
Do you know why anyone would be calling his number?
I have no idea, no.
Where was he at that point, do you know?
Not sure, but I believe he was at home.
Okay, do you know who would have called his number at 12:55 a.m. on Wednesday, February 12th?
No, I don't.
2003? If I showed you the record, would it refresh your recollection at all?
Probably not.
Okay. Now, you said something about being at the ranch for a couple of weeks during that time period, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And what did you mean by a couple of weeks?
I mean to spend the night, most of the nights there.
And are you talking about working all day and all night, or just all night?
No, talking about working all day and all night.
Okay. And that's in the main residence?
Yes.
Well, if you're working all day or all night, or both, in the main residence, are you necessarily going to see if somebody drives a vehicle?
Objection. Argumentative.
Sustained.
You're not always looking at the vehicles, are you, when you do your work?
Absolutely not, no. That was not my job to keep an eye on them.
And that's a very big house, right?
It's true. Very big house.
And what kind of work were you doing in the house at that point in time?
Well, it was different. Many things. Just making sure that the house was clean, that we had what the guests needed. And it was not just that. It was just also driving the limousine different areas. It could be picking up people, dropping off people. So I was not always there at the ranch.
And if you're not always there at the ranch, you couldn't possibly always know if someone's driving a vehicle on the ranch, correct?
That is correct.
Objection. Argumentative.
Sustained.
Were you always on the ranch during those weeks that the prosecutor asked you questions about?
Well, once again, I was not always there. Like I said, I was always driving somebody somewhere else.
Okay, where would you drive people to?
I drove people to LA, pick up people from LA, Burbank. I mean, yes, Burbank. Santa Barbara, you know.
And how often would you drive people off the ranch to LA, or Burbank, or Santa Barbara?
Well, it depends. I mean, it was to the point that I was driving people, almost every other day or every day during the Christmas season.
And if you're driving people off the ranch to LA and Burbank and Santa Barbara, and you're gone every day or every other day, would it be reasonable to say you're not going to be looking at who's driving a vehicle on the ranch?
Objection. Argumentative.
Overruled. You may answer.
That is correct.
And are you saying that during that period of time, you were probably more off the ranch than on it while you were working?
Not necessarily, because if it was, it depends on the area that I was picking up people. It could have been 2, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours. But I spent a lot of time at the ranch also.
When you drove to Los Angeles, typically how long would it take you from the moment you left the ranch till the moment you returned?
Talking 5 hours, 6 hours.
Okay, now, were you the primary person who would drive people off the ranch?
No, it was another driver before I started to do that, yes.
Who would decide whether you were going to drive someone off the ranch?
I'm going to object as beyond the scope.
Sustained.
The prosecutor asked you questions about your office at Neverland, okay?
Right.
And where is that office located?
It is located on the back of the house. When you first go in the main entry in the back, it is the first room on your left side.
And is that very close to the kitchen?
It's just a wall dividing that.
Is there a door to that office?
No, it has no door.
In fact, people can go in and out of that office very freely, correct?
That is correct, yes.
In fact, you pass that office when you're coming in from the back, right?
Correct, yes.
You pass that office if you're leaving the house from the back, right?
That is correct, yes.
And what do you find in that office?
There's videos. There's all kinds of stuff. Glasses. Stuff that is there that belongs to Mr. Jackson.
There are phones, right?
There's a phone, yes.
Virtually anyone can walk in or out of that office, right?
Yes.
You were not the only one using that office at that point in time, right?
No, because everybody can go in and use it.
Were you the only one using the drawers in that office at that point in time?
No, not necessarily.
In fact, other people used those drawers and didn't tell you what they put in them, right?
Well, I know pretty much I knew what was in those drawers.
Well, if you were on a drive to LA and back, you wouldn't know who was in or out of that office, right?
Objection. Argumentative.
Sustained.
No further questions.
Mr. Salas, I wanted to just make sure I understood one thing about your testimony correctly. Mr. Mesereau asked you at the beginning of his cross-examination if you saw Mr. Jackson intoxicated only 3 times. Is that accurate, that you saw him intoxicated only 3 times?
Your Honor, I limited that to the time period.
Okay, let me rephrase. Let's say during the year 2003, how often did you see Mr. Jackson intoxicated?
Objection. Foundation.
Overruled.
You may answer.
Lately, it was a lot. I would say it became to the point that he was intoxicated a lot.
How often in a week?
I'll say, 4 times maybe, or more than that.
And Mr. Mesereau asked you a number of questions about whether certain things were reported to you, such as children asking for vodka in a drink. That was never reported to you?
That was never reported to me, no.
Or children writing something nasty on a wall. That was never reported to you?
That is correct.
Now, do the amusement park operators report to you as the house manager?
No, they never reported it to me.
So I believe your former testimony is that only the maids would report to you, and the chefs, the people who work in the house.
Yes.
And can you tell me, is there a general rule concerning giving children what they ask for at Neverland?
Objection. Beyond the scope.
Sustained.
Well, if a child asks for something like vodka from somebody, is that something that would necessarily be reported?
Objection. Argumentative. Beyond the scope.
Overruled.
Is that something that you've seen reported before?
Well, I would say that it had to be reported.
I'm sorry?
It had to be reported if there was something like that, yes.
And did you ever see a report of that nature?
Never got any reports.
Then how do you know it had to be reported?
Well, I'm saying because if it's a kid, and the kid is asking for a drink, somebody needs to tell somebody.
So that's the type of thing that would have been reported if it happened?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
No further questions.
All right, thank you. You may step down. Call your next witness.
Call Vic Alvarez.
Come forward, please, to the witness stand. You may be seated. You're still under oath.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Good afternoon, Mr. Alvarez.
Good afternoon.
I should say, Detective Alvarez. Did you interview an employee of Neverland Ranch by the name of Julio Avila?
I did.
And did that interview take place on March 21, 2005?
Yes.
All right. And why did you interview Mr. Avila on that date?
I had received a defense interview that had been taken by a private investigator.
And did you go to confirm some of the information that you received in that report?
I did.
Did you ask Mr. Avila some questions about the Arvizo family operating one of the amusement park rides at Neverland Ranch?
Yes.
What did he tell you?
He said that, I asked him in particular the ride, I believe it was the swing, how it operated. He said it had an off and on button, and that Star had started the ride after watching him operate it.
Did he tell you which Arvizo children were present when that ride was being operated?
Yes, he did.
Who was present?
He said all 3 were present.
Did he tell you whether or not there were any other children who were in the amusement park area during that time?
Only the 3 children were present.
There were no other children present?
No.
Objection. Leading.
Overruled.
Did he say anything about operating a zipper ride immediately before he went over and stopped the Arvizo children from operating that ride?
Yes.
Did he say who he was operating that zipper ride for?
No.
Did you ask him about the Arvizo children and their behavior in general?
Yes.
Did you ask him about whether or not they crashed any carts, or did he give you any information about that?
Yes. I believe he did say that they would ride the carts recklessly, but he said all the kids. I think he was pretty general about all the kids ride the carts recklessly.
I'm going to move to strike after, yes. He said they did. Non-responsive.
Stricken. Non-responsive. The answer is yes.
That's fine. Did he say anything about how all the kids operated carts at Neverland?
He did.
Objection. Relevance.
Overruled.
What did he tell you about that?
He said that all the kids ride the carts recklessly.
Did he tell you anything in general about the behavior of children who are guests at Neverland?
I asked him.
All right. And did he answer you?
Yes.
What did he tell you?
He said that basically the kids are free to do whatever they want. And I asked him, do they pretty much run amok here? And he said, yes.
At some time during your interview, did he ever express some confusion as to whether or not he was talking about the behavior or misbehavior of the Arvizo children as opposed to the Casio children?
Objection. Calls for a conclusion without foundation.
Sustained.
Did he ever express to you any indication that he didn't understand he was talking? You were talking about the Arvizo children?
Yes.
And how did he express that?
I'm going to object. I may have to object to the last question in order to make it correct, so I'd move to strike the answer for the purpose of objecting that it calls for a conclusion without a foundation.
Overruled. You may answer.
The question again, please?
The question was, how did he express to you any confusion he had over which family you were trying to ask him questions about?
He did not know the sister's name, and he was confusing names of the two families.
Did he ever say anything to you about where he believed the family that was? That you were asking questions about? Did he ever indicate where he believed they were from?
He just said they were not from California.
Did he ever indicate to you whether or not he filed reports on any of this information that he was giving you?
He did not file any reports.
Did he ever indicate to you whether or not he had knowledge that Mr. Jackson possessed erotic materials, adult erotic materials in his bedroom?
Yes.
What did he say?
I'm going to object. This is without foundation.
Overruled. You may answer.
Well, I'm okay.
We were.
It seems to me there should be a foundation first as to how this witness would have known.
I'll object to the speaking objection. This is impeachment of the testimony.
The objection was overruled. Go ahead.
There was mention of adult material and where it had come from. And I asked him if it came from, could it have possibly come from Mr. Jackson's bedroom? At which time he said, yes, it could have.
I'm going to object and move to strike. That's just based on speculation. It's not impeachment.
I don't think he's finished answering the question.
Are you finished? Had you finished answering the question?
No, Your Honor.
All right, go ahead and finish.
He said, yes, it could have come from the bedroom.
And did he say why?
He was aware that there was this type of material in the bedroom.
Your Honor, it's improper impeachment if there's no foundation for the testimony, the hearsay. I object.
I'll sustain that objection and strike his answer.
I believe, well,
Being aware lacks foundation, personal knowledge.
we did, well, I could ask to tell you at sidebar that there was specific testimony regarding this that goes to this impeachment, irrespective of foundation.
I mean, I know what it is, if there's any question in the court's mind.
Well, come forward. Discussion held off the record at sidebar. I'm going to strike this witness's testimony concerning what knowledge Mr. Avila had about adult material, and I'm going, at the ranch, and I'm going to base that ruling on the fact that there is insufficient foundation for that testimony, so the jury's ordered to disregard that testimony.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Alvarez, during this interview that you had with Mr. Avila, did you ask him generally about the behavior of the Arvizo children at the ranch?
I did.
Did he ever mention to you anything about the Arvizo children misbehaving using the quads?
No.
Lastly, did you attempt to contact Chris Tucker as a witness in this case?
I did.
On how many occasions?
3 different occasions.
And how did you go about doing that?
Mr. Tucker lives in the LA County area. It's a gated community, so every time you pull up to the guard shack, they ask you who you are and what your business is. So I would identify myself as a detective with the sheriff's department. I had his address. The guard takes down the license plate of your vehicle, and I went to his residence.
So you actually made it through the gated entry?
I did.
Did you go to his residence?
I did.
Is his residence gated?
No.
Did you go to his front door?
I took pictures of his residence, and then I went to his front door.
Did you ever make contact with anybody at Mr. Tucker's residence?
No, I didn't.
Did you leave your business card?
I did.
Did you write any notes on that card?
I did.
What did you leave as a note?
On my business card has my name, my title, and phone numbers. And I would put on the bottom, over, and on the backside, I wrote, "Please call me," and I'd put my cell phone down on it.
You did this on how many occasions?
3 different occasions. I would leave a card on the front door in the mailbox.
Each time?
Yes.
Did you ever make contact with Mr. Tucker's attorney?
I did.
On how many occasions?
I believe it was 1 time.
And did you request of Mr. Tucker's attorney that Mr. Tucker contact you and allow you to interview him?
I did.
Have you ever received any calls from Mr. Tucker or his attorney to set up an interview for the purposes of this case?
No.
Thank you. No further questions.
Detective Alvarez, first of all, with regard to Chris Tucker, how many times did you go to the actual residence of Mr. Tucker?
3 times.
3 times to the front gate?
To the front door of his residence.
Okay, so you went to the gate, and 3 separate times you were allowed to go through the gate to go to his front door?
Yes. Actually, after the first time, the guard knew me and just waved at me.
I didn't ask that. I asked, did you go to his front door?
I went to his front door of his residence, not of the guard shack.
Okay, that's what I'm asking. You went to the front door of his residence?
Yes.
And you're saying he was not there or nobody answered the door each of the 3 times?
That's correct.
So the guards did not get permission to let you through from Mr. Tucker. They let you through because you showed a badge and said you had business there?
That's correct.
Were you ever on the property at any time when you saw Chris Tucker's mother?
No.
And you believed you went to the correct house?
Yes.
You took pictures of it?
I did.
Alright, now, with regard to Mr. Tucker's lawyer, let me withdraw that. First of all, on one of those occasions you left a card, is that correct?
No, I said on 3 occasions I left a card.
All 3 occasions you left a card?
Yes, I did.
In response to having a card left, on one occasion you got a call back from Chris Tucker's lawyer, is that correct?
No.
You called Chris Tucker's lawyer yourself?
I did.
How did you know who his lawyer was?
I believe it was given to me by one of my supervisors.
Okay, do you know if Chris Tucker's lawyer called to say, "I'm Chris Tucker's lawyer"?
I spoke to him.
Okay, before you spoke to him.
Okay.
Before you spoke to him, one of your supervisors gave you a name and said, "Here's his lawyer," right?
Correct.
And then you called him up?
Correct.
Alright, now, and then Mr. Tucker's lawyer, do you remember his name?
I don't.
Is that Mr. Sweeney, by any chance, or is it somebody else?
The name sounds familiar, but I can't positively say that that was his attorney.
Okay, do you know how many attorneys Mr. Tucker has?
I don't.
Okay, now, you've been around for some time working in the courts as well as being on the street and being a detective, correct?
Yes.
Alright, you're aware that people who are movie stars or celebrities tend to have a number of different lawyers, is that correct?
Yes.
Objection. Relevancy and assumes facts.
Sustained.
When you talk to this lawyer, you can't remember his name. Do you recall what capacity he was calling you back in? Did he tell you, "I'm an entertainment lawyer," or a...
He didn't call me back. I actually made contact with him when I called him.
I'm sorry. I think you said that. It gets to be this time of day and sometimes.
I understand.
I missed that. In any event, you called him?
Yes.
Did he tell you what his capacity was? I'm Mr. Tucker's entertainment lawyer, or, I'm a lawyer who.
I'm Mr. Tucker's lawyer. What can I do for you?
And you had asked to have a meeting with Mr. Tucker?
I asked him if, well, I told him who I was, and I told him I would like to interview his client.
Okay, alright. And did you call him back after that?
No.
So you called him one time, and that was it.
He told me Mr. Tucker had nothing to say.
Okay, did you call him that one time and that was it?
There's no reason for me to call him back after that comment.
I see. Did you go out to Mr. Tucker's house before or after you had that conversation with this lawyer who said, Mr. Tucker has nothing to say?
This was after.
The call was after? Or the visits were after?
The visits were after.
The visits. So after Mr. Tucker's lawyer said he has nothing to say to law enforcement, you then went to his house 3 times and left cards?
When I called his attorney, it was early on in the investigation, and I would say it was probably in '04 sometime. When I went to Mr. Tucker's residence, it was earlier this year.
Alright, now, having said all of that, a person has absolutely no obligation to speak to you under the law of California. Isn't that right?
Objection. Argumentative. Relevance.
Overruled.
That's true.
Okay, and this is not the first witness who has refused to talk to you.
I wanted to talk to him. I didn't want to talk to his attorney.
My question was, this is not the first witness, in your experience as a law enforcement officer, who has refused to talk to you, is it?
Same objection.
Sustained.
Alright, do you think it's possible that people who know Michael Jackson feel that the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department is on a witch hunt?
Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative.
Sustained.
Alright, let me ask you about the interview you had with Mr. Avila. Now, this interview took place on March the 12th, I think it was?
21st.
I'm sorry, March the 21st. Okay, March the 21st of this year, correct?
Yes.
And that was after Mr. Avila had already been interviewed and submitted a declaration, is that correct?
3 months after.
Okay, so you were aware of basically what he had to say by the time you went to see him, is that correct?
Well, I knew what was on the report. I didn't know what he had to say.
Alright, now, when you went out to talk to Mr. Avila, where did you meet him, by the way?
I went to his residence.
Okay, it was about 1:30 in the afternoon?
Yes.
And you took the prior interview and declaration with you, is that correct?
I did.
Was the prior interview with the sheriff's department?
I took the prior interview that he had done with the private investigator.
So there was a private investigator's interview, and then a declaration that was prepared and he signed under penalty of perjury, is that correct?
It was a declaration that I had in my hand.
So.
Because.
Go ahead.
I suppose, go ahead.
Let me ask another question. Let's just clear that up. Clear this up. When you say he had a prior interview with you, you had a report of an interview by a private investigator. Is that correct?
Yes. I don't think we had interviewed him prior, our department.
And then, that was my original question. Fine. And then you had a declaration that Mr. Avila had signed under penalty of perjury?
All I had was a declaration with a signature at the bottom.
In your report, you said you spoke to Mr. Avila concerning a prior interview and declaration. So your reference is to
the one piece of paper that I had in my hand.
So you believe that the declaration was a result of the prior interview. Was that the reference there?
Yes.
Alright, fine. Almost all of what you went over with Mr. Avila was, in fact, consistent with his declaration, was it not?
I don't agree with that.
Alright, he said he worked as a ride attendant in the amusement park at Neverland Ranch, is that correct?
I'm going to object to counsel reading the interview into the record.
This isn't the interview. This is the report of the interview, but I'm hitting particular points. Sorry to respond.
The objection is overruled.
Do you have the question in mind?
No, I don't.
I'll ask it again. Mr. Avila told you that he worked as a ride attendant in the amusement park area of Neverland Ranch, correct?
No, he didn't.
Did he tell you? Well, he didn't say that?
He said he was a security guard, but used to be a ride attendant.
What I asked you was, did he tell you he worked as a ride attendant in the amusement park area?
Prior.
Well, wait a minute. I'm going to go back. Here. I'm going to sustain the objection. There's no sense in going through and asking those kind of questions. Let's move along.
All right.
The parts that, he's right, that they agree upon is not relevant. The parts they don't agree on is.
Well, prior consistent statements.
No.
No? All right. You indicated that there was an issue about, or let me put it this way. You testified, in response to questions from Mr. Auchincloss, that there were. He had made some statements about who was present at the ranch at the time that he was operating some rides while the Arvizo children were there?
Yes.
All right. Now, one thing, if I may, he did tell you he was a ride attendant at that time?
At that time.
Okay. And when the Arvizo children were there, he told you about the time that Star Arvizo went over and started the swing ride, is that correct?
Correct.
All right. And he said that, you asked him who was present when Star did that, and he said that he couldn't remember the name of the sister at that point, is that correct?
Right.
But he said Star and Gavin. He's the one that gave the names, Star and Gavin, correct?
Aren't you just doing what I've asked you not to do?
Well, this is the particular area that he was talking about, who was present, and I believe the issue was.
You can ask those questions. What I don't want you doing is to read the report and ask him if that's right. The question of whether he said Star and Gavin were there is a legitimate question, but you're doing exactly what I asked you not to do.
Okay, I'm sorry. I will not look at it. I will try to do it this way.
It's one thing to ask him the facts. It's another to ask him whether he agrees with statements in the report. And you continue to ask him whether or not he agrees with statements in the report, which is what I don't want you to do.
Very well. So, Mr. Avila told you that Star was the one who tried to start the ride, correct?
Yes.
And he told you he couldn't remember the sister's name, but he said the sister was there, is that correct?
Yes.
And then he also told you Gavin was present, correct?
I don't know if he actually mentioned his name.
Now, you asked him if anybody else was present, right?
Yes.
He told you he couldn't remember whether or not other children were present at the ranch, isn't that correct?
He told me there was nobody else present.
Where?
At the rides, at the amusement park.
My question was, did he tell you he couldn't remember whether or not other children were at the ranch, were staying at the ranch at that time?
Objection. Relevancy.
Overruled.
Possibly.
Would it refresh your recollection to look at your report?
Sure.
Do you have your report with you?
I do.
I'd like you to look at page 2 at the bottom. Read it to yourself and see if that.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Now, you asked him also. You talked about the Arvizo children being destructive at the ranch, something to that effect?
Yes.
All right, isn't it a fact that Mr. Avila told you that other children would do things, but it seemed like the Arvizo children did this more often than other children? That's offered for impeachment. I'm not.
I understand.
Okay.
Possibly, but there was more to it than that.
I'd ask you to look at page 3 of your report and see if that refreshes your recollection.
Yes.
Okay, and in fact, does that refresh your recollection that he said, quote, but it seemed like the Arvizo children did this more often than other children, close quote?
That's correct.
When you put quotes in a report, that is a direct verbatim quote from what the person actually said to you. Is that correct?
That's why I do that.
Yeah. May I have just a moment here, Your Honor?
Okay.
And did Mr. Avila relate to you that Star Arvizo had written some obscene words on the wall in one of the control rooms?
Yes.
And he used the name, Star, correct?
Yes.
All object is beyond the scope.
Sustained.
All right, and then what? Let me put it this way and see. On that last issue about the writing something obscene on the wall, was there any hesitation when Mr. Avila told you the name of the person that did it?
Same objection.
Overruled.
No.
And may I ask, then, the name of the person? What was the name of the person he gave you who did it?
Star.
Okay, thank you. And with regard to the pornographic magazines, did Mr. Avila tell you the name of the child who had the pornographic magazines that he brought from home?
Objection. Beyond the scope.
Overruled.
It's magazine.
Or magazine. Alright, I'll accept that for now, but did he tell you the name of the person who did that?
Yes.
Who was it?
Star.
I'm sorry?
Star.
And if you look at the bottom of page 4, let me ask you if that helps refresh your recollection as to whether or not Star had pornographic magazines, as opposed to a magazine.
Objection. Beyond the scope.
Overruled.
I can explain that, but it does say magazines.
See your reference, though. Your understanding was he was talking about Star having one magazine in his pocket or one magazine in his possession that he said he brought from home.
I was referring to what was written in the investigative report from the private investigator, and it said, magazines.
Okay.
And that's what I thought, it was magazines.
So when you asked him about that, he said Star told him that he brought the pornographic magazines from home. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then you clarified with Mr. Avila that he had seen one magazine in Star's possession. Is that correct?
Yes.
Alright, now, you said something else about. Did Mr. Avila ever tell you about the quads? I don't have the exact quote, but it was something to that effect, and you said, no, he didn't. Do you remember that question and answer?
Yes.
Did you ever ask Mr. Avila about the quads?
No.
No further questions.
Just one question. Detective Alvarez, when Mr. Avila was describing the issues concerning the writing of the information on the control room, I believe it was a control door of some type.
Yes.
And when he was referring to the issue regarding pornographic magazines or a magazine, was this after or before the confusion was cleared up about which family you were talking about with Mr. Avila?
I object. That misstates the evidence. Assumes facts not in evidence.
It's a difficult question.
Yeah, I can rephrase it. Maybe make it a little simpler. You previously mentioned that there was some discussion between you and Mr. Avila regarding whether or not you were talking about the Arvizo family or the Casio family, correct?
Correct.
Did that discussion take place before or after you talked to him about the magazine?
That was before.
Did that discussion take place before or after you talked to him about the writing that Star did?
As far as which family it was before.
Okay, so you had already had a discussion about the individual names of the children before you spoke to him about those two incidents?
Yes.
Objection.
Alright.
Objection. It's argumentative and misstates the evidence.
Alright, overruled. The answer is in.
Thank you. No further questions.
Judge, it's.
Here's what I'm getting at. The original discussion, when you first started, you were asking him if he was talking about the Casios or the Arvizos. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And he told you that he was talking about the Arvizos, and they were more destructive than the Casios, correct?
I think he said, than other kids. He didn't specify.
And he said he recalled the Arvizo boys were the ones throwing things and spitting at employees from the rides?
Objection. Beyond the scope.
That's the place where he was.
Objection. Speaking.
Clarifying it.
Go ahead. You may answer that.
Repeat your question.
During this conversation, he told you that he recalled the Arvizo boys throwing things and spitting at employees while on the rides, correct?
Yes.
And he told you that the Arvizo boys would throw their shoes off the top of the Ferris wheel, correct?
Yes.
And then he said that the Casio children were also active, but not as active as the Arvizo boys, correct?
Yes.
And thereafter, when he talked about, let me withdraw that. At all times when he talked about Star and Gavin, he used their first names as Star and Gavin, correct?
Not at first, no.
The very beginning of your interview with him, he told you, let me withdraw that. Before that conversation we just had about who was more active, the Arvizos or the Casios, he had told you specifically that Star Arvizo was the one that started the swing ride, correct?
I don't recall if he used the name, but he did say the younger of the two brothers.
Let's, just a minute. I'm letting this go on. But the reason is, I understand this is the last witness we have today, right?
Yes.
I don't want to take a break and come back for one question if we're going to release the jury. That's why I'm sitting here, just so everyone understands. Everyone, being the jury.
With that kind of pressure, I have no further questions.
No.
All right, you may step down.
Thank you, Your Honor.
So that is the last witness, right?
It is, Your Honor.
For today. We have witnesses tomorrow.
We do. And can I request the court stay on the bench after the jury leaves?
Yes, to the jury. So I'm going to excuse you now for the rest of the day and we'll see you tomorrow morning at 8:30. What, did they lock you out?
Roadblock.
All right, the door's closed.
Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate that. I wanted to have the court remain just briefly because I wanted the court to have an opportunity. We intend to move the court tomorrow morning, as part of our evidence, to play the videotape interview, the initial interview with Gavin Arvizo which occurred in July of 2003. And I wanted to have the exhibit marked, and I'm sure the court would like to look at it in advance in order to make a ruling. I shouldn't say I'm sure you would like to, but I'm sure the court would feel compelled to do that. And the video is about an hour long, and there are, if the court could make a note that when the video gets to, on a timer, 49 minutes and 50 seconds, that there is a portion that we would propose be deleted, up to 51 minutes and 45 seconds. And then that the videotape be terminated at 1 minute and 4 seconds. I'm sorry, 1 hour and 4 minutes and 10 seconds. The actual length is 1 hour and 4 minutes and 30 seconds. We feel that the materials contained within the time frame that we've delineated would not be appropriate and would be, in our view, prejudicial, and so we're taking them out on our own. But we would like to play it. We believe that the tape is relevant on the issues of prior consistent statements made by Gavin Arvizo, and we believe it is also relevant, particularly relevant, on the issue of whether or not the testimony of the child was scripted. They put a witness on, Mrs. Holzer, Miss Holzer, to indicate that Mrs. Arvizo was in the habit and custom of having her kids script things, and there's been other indications by the defense throughout this trial that this whole thing was scripted by the mother. And I believe that this is relevant evidence on that issue for the jury in rebuttal to rebut that evidence that's been put on by the defense. And that's our offer of proof, and I would like to have this marked as next in order, and if the clerk could help me, actually, I have some tags.
While that's being marked, unless Mr. Sneddon has another comment, could I be heard on that briefly? I have no idea what occurs during the deleted sections, so I have no opportunity to speak to that at this precise moment. However, this is just the kind of rebuttal that is designed to be dramatic, and it's just what the Supreme Court said should not occur. It's a way to have Gavin Arvizo come back and testify, in essence, without cross-examination one more time in front of the jury right at the end of the case to bolster what is, I think, quite a weak case with quite a bit of impeachment as to this family. And if they wanted to play this tape, they could have played it previously, because the impeachment occurred during the prosecution's case. It continued during the defense case, but the impeachment was substantial during the prosecution case, and there's no reason why they couldn't have played it then and said, well, if you're going to suggest he made this up, let's play this tape. And I'd remind the court that we had police officers up on the stand who, I believe Detective Robel and Detective Zealous, and we went over specific statements that were made in this interview that they now want to play. They held it, instead of playing it at that time and saying, okay, we'll show you what it said, now they've held it until rebuttal to play it, and that's improper rebuttal. That's the kind of dramatic thing that should not be permitted. The fact that there was other impeachment of Janet Arvizo during the defense case is hardly a reason to bring in this tape, when the actual impeachment of Gavin Arvizo occurred during the case in chief. So we would strongly object on that. And also, of course, it could we have to go back and look at it. I'm not saying this is a promise or a threat. I'm just saying it's, as a lawyer, if we look at this, if this sort of thing starts to come in, obviously we may be playing other excerpts from other things, and, he was interviewed several times, made several inconsistent statements over a period of time, depending on whether or not law enforcement knew of the rebuttal video and other things that have been brought out. And so we may have to play other parts or ask leave to play other parts. I think it's too late. They had their opportunity, didn't take it. They can't do it now just for dramatic effect.
Judge, I take exception to what Mr. Sanger says, first of all, about the status of the evidence in this case, that we could have played this tape in our case in chief, because I don't think we could have. And second of all, I don't know it was at that point where the defense had raised, through evidence, the fabrication issue and the scripted issue. And they have made a big deal about this in this family, and I think after the court sees this videotape, it will see, as the jury should have the opportunity to see in a case of this importance, that this was far from videotape, scripted, and we welcome Mr. Sanger to put on any other kind of videos that he wants. There's only one other one, it was a short one, with regard to the victim in this case. But we believe that the case that the defense has put on has raised this as an issue to the point where we feel we now are entitled, under the evidence code, to present it. And this wasn't an issue we created. This is an issue they created. And they created it through their witnesses, not through ours. And it seems a little unfair, having sat through hours of outtakes and minutes of puff pieces about the ranch and some of the other videos that the defense was allowed to put on in their defense, that we can't now put on a piece of evidence that goes right to the heart of this case and to the heart of their defense. And so I would ask the court, and we can talk about it after you see it, but I think you'll see what we're talking about, and I've had it marked as People's 900 for identification purposes, and
That's a DVD, is it?
it is, Your Honor, a DVD.
Your Honor, I realize ordinarily it's argument, rebuttal, argument, but, or response, rebuttal. In other words, I usually don't get another chance, but could I respond to one thing particularly? I want to make a legal point, if I could.
All right, 1 point.
I wasn't finished.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I wanted to alert the court to one other thing, Your Honor, with regard to the video. The sound on the video on this particular DVD, the sound is not the greatest, and it may be that you need amplification. The courtroom will be no problem. Everybody can hear it. But I know when you listen to it on the DVD, you may have to use headphones to hear it, or maybe your computer can jack up the sound, but I wanted to alert you to that. If that's a problem, we have a VHS version of it that we can bring over that you can plug in, and it has no problems. So I wanted to let the court know that. I'm sorry, counsel.
On that last point, VHS or otherwise, it just needs to be marked for identification, whatever it is, so we know what we're talking about. The legal point is, in addition to what I've already said about the dramatic effect, there's also a confrontation issue with regard to this, and I think under Crawford, which is still law that is developing from the United States Supreme Court, I think under Crawford, the confrontation issue here would involve a constitutional right of the defendant. This witness, had it been brought out while he was in the case in chief, we could have dealt with it. And even then, it could only be offered for prior consistent statements where inconsistent statements were offered, it seems to me. But to bring it out now really denies the right of confrontation. So,
Okay.
I take it the court's going to watch it, or listen to it, or, I don't know.
Well, do you think I should just rule out of hand? Just deny playing it and not know what it says?
Not necessarily, but I think the offer from the prosecution was such that I think the court knows it's a long video of the complaining witness, so I suppose you could rule based on that alone, but that's why I said I assume the court's going to watch it.
All right, let me. On another issue here. Looking at your witness list here for tomorrow, it looks like you also put /Friday. Is that your thinking? This is going to go into Friday?
No, I really think. Most of those witnesses are very short, Your Honor, and of course I can't account for cross-examination and who's doing it, but I think there's every reason to believe we will finish on Thursday, and maybe it could flop over, Your Honor. You know how it is in trial. But our expectation is that some of these people are like some of these witnesses today, like we ask 3 or 4 questions and that's it. And several of them have to do simply with establishing the records, custodian of records, that we want to ask a couple of questions about. But frankly, the only one that's problematic is Mr. Garrigus, and that involves a discussion that I need to have with counsel on some of those emails about whether, his establishing the foundation for some of those. But I'm telling the court that we are doing the best we can to try to get this done tomorrow. And that's all I can promise you.
Okay.
Now, in that regard, before we change to another subject, and I'll just sit here if that's all right, depending on what the court does with this tape, if the court allows the tape to be played, we will then want to have Gavin Arvizo available for rebuttal. And if the prosecution's going to rest on Thursday, rest their rebuttal on Thursday or early Friday, he would be one of the witnesses we would, I believe right now, we would want to call. Obviously, this is a fairly spontaneous decision, but I believe that's the case, and we were required, and appreciate also the courtesy. We're required to let the district attorney know if we need any of the Arvizos here, rather than subpoena them directly or contact them directly, so I just want to let the court know that's what we are considering, and they should make arrangements to have him available, if possible. Or even if it's not possible, for that matter.
Well, we will do what we promised to do for the court. And we'll discuss the relevancy and the appropriateness of that when we come to that. Judge, could I make one other comment? I know the court personnel needs to take a break, too. But I promise it will only take a second, but it's important in terms of the schedule. We filed a motion with the court with regard to the limiting instruction on the Bashir outtakes. Not on the Bashir outtakes, the Hamid outtakes. And you recall, at the time you agreed to play them, you said you were deferring the ruling on whether it's hearsay or whether it was going to be a similar instruction to the Bashir tape itself. Obviously, if the court's going to determine that those outtakes come in for the truth of the matter stated, we will expand our rebuttal to confront the questions that were made. I sincerely believe, in all honesty, that the jury should be instructed the same way they were as to the Bashir tape, and I hope the court will do that. But I wanted to tell you, if you decide to do otherwise, I will have to represent to the court that our rebuttal would be substantially longer, to take on some of the issues in those outtakes, as to the truthfulness of those statements.
The instruction that we gave on the Bashir tape was that it was not being admitted for the truth of the matter asserted, with the exception that some statements by the defendant were being admitted to the truth of the matter asserted, right?
Except for those admissions dealing with the sleeping with boys admissions.
So you're proposing that same instruction?
Yes, sir, I am. And as a matter of fact, I went back last night in preparation for this, and I actually read your admonition to the jury, and it strikes me that we all forgot this. That we were going to tell them what portions, because you say in your instruction, you might want to look at it, but you say in your instruction that you were going to tell them what portions of that, at a later time, come in under those auspices, and I guess we really never did it. We kind of assumed they would figure that out on their own. I might just say to the court, you might want to look at that to see if you want to give further clarifying instructions, and we had that motion where we did cull out, and the court did cull out certain parts of that particular video that the court did agree could come in for the truth of the matter, and we might want to highlight that to the jury so there would be no mistake to the jury what it is that the court ruled in that respect. I do believe that in the outtakes portion, most of those admissions by the defendant that you admitted for the truth of the matter are not in that outtake part. Both counsel, I believe, probably, we should review that to make sure that my representation to the court is correct. But that is a loose end that I noticed last night when I was preparing for this thing.
I have a note to myself on that issue, too.
All right, thank you, Your Honor.
That took more than a second, but.
It was a lawyer's second.
A lawyer's second, and I'll just say.
It's like a New York minute.
It's the opposite of that.
See if you can do it in the same time.
I can do it in the same amount of time. First of all, on those issues, we would like to be heard, and I don't want to press the court and the staff while you're waiting for a break, but I would like to be heard on that motion that was filed in general, and what portions of the original Bashir tape should be received by the jury for the truth of the matter and how that should be presented to the jury, and then secondly, on the issue of whether or not the entire outtakes come in for the truth of the matter asserted as the context of the overall statements of the defendant. So if the court wants to hear it now, fine, but I suspect not.
No.
I'd be happy to address it some other time.
Okay.
And I did have one of those things that really would only take about 45 seconds. I have an exhibit I'd like to mark next in order, and it is a part of the Verizon bill for Neverland Valley Ranch that we received at the same time the prosecution did from the records, or the phone records that were subpoenaed. However, when the prosecution marked their records, they pared them down to the ones they wanted to use, of course, so this has not been admitted yet. Mr. Sneddon agreed that he would not object to the foundation. In other words, that this is a phone bill that was prepared in the ordinary course of business and was presented to the court under 1560 of the Evidence Code. Mr. Sneddon wants to argue relevance. But I'd like to get the first part done, and let the court know that we then need to argue as to whether or not the jury should see this.
You can have that marked, then.
The representation by Mr. Sanger is correct. I waived the foundation, but I don't waive the relevancy and the materiality. Thank you.
All right, we'll recess until tomorrow morning.
Thank you, Your Honor.